British agents spent years close to senior Nazis, infiltrating Hitler's inner circle and providing key intelligence that helped Britain during the Second World War. The real story of the mysterious spy Bill Ropp had gone untold until now. The former diplomat, Tim Willasey-Wilsey, is a visiting professor at King's College London and the author of The Spy and the Devil, which tells Bill Ropp's story. Tim, welcome to Times Radio.
Good morning.
Thanks very much for being here. Who was Bill Ropp and why haven't we heard of him?
Well, Bill Ropp was a baron from the German property-owning minority in Lithuania. And it was a tough thing being in Lithuania after the 1905 Russian Revolution. They weren't really wanted by the Russians anymore. They were distrusted by the Germans. They weren't liked by the Lithuanians because they were property owners, and the Polish didn't like them because they were Protestants, not Catholics. So they felt pretty unwelcome. Bill Ropp ended up in UK. He went to Birmingham University. He married a British woman, and before the First World War, he was living in Wiltshire. When the war broke out, he went straight, in August 1914, he went straight to join up with British forces, was told he couldn't because he was Russian, had a Russian passport, went to the Home Office, changed it in about 3 weeks, couldn't happen now, and found himself a British citizen fighting for the British Army in the First World War.
And how did he wind up in Germany working for MI6?
So he started working for MI6 in 1919 in the Baltic states, really being used against Russia. One of his great skills is he had 4 absolutely fluent languages, Russian, German, French and English. In fact, he could pass as a national of all 4 countries. And after his work in the Baltic states and a walk-on part in the Zinoviev letter scandal of 1924, he was sent to Germany to start reporting really on the rebirth of the German Air Force. But later, of course, this boisterous political party in Bavaria was causing noises, and MI6 said we wanted to know more about Hitler and his gang.
And he infiltrates, Adolf Hitler's inner circle incredibly effectively. How does he do that?
It is amazing. He starts using a Baltic baron friend of his who introduced him to a member of the stormtroopers, and the stormtrooper introduced him to his boss, and that his boss introduced him to a guy called Arno Schickedanz, who's a senior Nazi, and Schickedanz introduced him to Alfred Rosenberg, Hitler's chief ideologist. And after a number of months, Rosenberg says, hang on a moment, since you're going to be in the Munich area, I think you should meet Adolf Hitler. So in sort of 5 stages, neat stages, without ever asking to meet Hitler, or indeed Rosenberg, he's in touch with Adolf Hitler himself.
And his first meeting with Hitler goes spectacularly wrong. It's like a sort of comedy of errors. Tell us about it. Complete
comedy of errors. Firstly, he was obviously nervous, so he chain smoked throughout the meeting, and Hitler absolutely hated smoke. And when Hitler raised the question of the Jews, Bill Ropp said, well, actually, Jews fought very valiantly on the side of the British Army in the First World War, and I don't see there's a problem there. And that sent Hitler off onto an absolutely mad rage. Poor old Bill Ropp travelled back to Garmisch on the train where he was on a sort of winter holiday, thinking that was the end of it. All his efforts destroyed in one meeting.
But I mean, what role do the Nazis think he's playing? Because obviously they know of his British connections. They know that he's British. So what do they think he's doing there? Why do they think he's befriending them?
Well, 2 things really. I mean, Hitler asks him, can you advise me on how well I'm going down in London circles? And Rosenberg knows that he's actually on the staff of the Times. Incidentally, in Berlin, and wants advice on how to get better publicity for himself from the Times newspaper. Rosenberg at this stage wants to be foreign minister and was very nearly foreign minister had he not made a incredible mistake by placing a swastika on the cenotaph in Whitehall.
Gosh. As what kind of information then is Bill Ropp passing back to the UK?
Initially it's political information. It's who's up, who's down. The rise of Goebbels, the rise of Himmler, the rise of Ribbentrop, and it's all of that sort of political stuff. But later on it becomes more directly relevant to what would be the war effort. So it's aviation. He was an engineer. And he was very friendly with the deputy head of the Luftwaffe, who incidentally had a Jewish father, which was extraordinary. And he's invited into Messerschmitt factories and Heinkel factories. He takes another British engineer in, a man called Roy Fedden. And Roy Fedden's got this amazing ability to look at a factory and make computations about, for example, the power-to-rate ratio of an aero engine he's looking at. So these visits produce remarkable intelligence.
And how is this landing back in the UK? Because the UK at the time, I suppose, initially, appeasement is in the ascendance. The idea no one wants a war. A lot of people don't believe there's even going to be a war. And so, given that so much of his information is of military basis, is it being dismissed? Is it being used to argue the case for preparing for war? What's happening?
Until 1936, it's getting no leverage at all. He cannot interest London in Germany. The last thing Britain wants is another war. Don't forget the First World War had only finished sort of 17 years earlier. So, but it's only sort of 1936 that they begin to realize, hang on, this is serious. And in 1938, the government, September 1938, just before Munich, the British government starts to take the threat very seriously. They commission from MI6 a report, and that report is largely based on Bill de Ropp's reporting. And actually, that is the moment when MI6 changes from being a provider of sort of small-level tactical intelligence on communists and saboteurs into a sort of the geopolitical service it is today.
So in many ways, he plays a major role in what MI6 has become, and the kind of the MI6 that is famed around the world. No James Bond without Bill de Ropp.
Absolutely. And in fact, the Foreign Office had been jealously protective of political reporting. They didn't want anyone else doing political reporting. But that first report in September 1938, which is entitled prosaically, What Should We Do?, is a masterly report. And that is the moment, really, that MI6 produces, gets onto the geopolitical stage and has real leverage in Whitehall.
Do the Nazis become suspicious of him?
They do. His cover is unravelling badly in 1938 in particular. And actually in October 1938 he arrives back in London after visiting the aircraft factories and says to MI6, look, I really can't go back. They're definitely onto me. And MI6 say, look, I'm sorry. You basically, you've what we've got. We've got to go back. And he goes back, and he's very lucky. By now, he's a friend of Alfred Rosenberg. He thinks Alfred Rosenberg is a nutcase, but he's a friend of Alfred Rosenberg. And Alfred Rosenberg, 3 days before the invasion of Poland, says, Bill, I think you'd better leave. And he takes the train and gets across the border into Switzerland, just as well, because he probably wouldn't have survived if he hadn't done.
Right, so it's a real sort of like by the seat of his pants kind of escape just before war breaks out. If the intelligence agencies in Britain had taken his intelligence more seriously earlier, if what he was telling them had prompted, quicker rearmament, history could have been very different.
I think it could have been. In as early as 1926, he starts reporting on the covert help that the Soviet government were giving the Germans in recreating the Luftwaffe, which had been banned by the Versailles Treaty. So that's 1926. It wasn't MI6 who didn't take it seriously. It was the British government who didn't take it seriously. It was, reported to the Foreign Office. But there was a feeling in London that the French had been too mean on the Germans, and the Versailles Treaty was unfair. And why shouldn't an important country have an air force? And so yes, there were various moments, lines in the sand, where you think actually somebody should have taken this more seriously. But appeasement ruled really until September 1938, really.
Given this is a figure who was then so central to Britain's eventual belated rearmament before the Second World War, and so central to the development of MI6, which has such a sort of important place in sort of Britain's identity and sense of itself and sort of geopolitical strength, why is he not a household name?
Well, I think two things, really. Firstly, he had a bit of a long twilight. So when he moves to Switzerland and then the war starts, MI6 now only want military intelligence. They don't want political intelligence. And, of course, he's cut off from his sources in Switzerland. So he has 6 rather miserable years in Switzerland in which he's not making the same impact as he did before. So his career tails off a bit, and he's retired immediately after May 1945. But the other important thing is, we only ever hear about spies who fail. We hear about Philby, we hear about Blake, we hear about, all these famous cases. Spies who are successful and are never caught and die in their beds, as Bill de Ropp died in a little village in Herefordshire, in his bed, an old man, just don't get known about.
How did you come to hear about his story, and did you immediately recognise it for what it was?
Yeah, curiously enough, it's there hiding in plain sight. It's 6 pages of Keith Jeffreys' authorised history of MI6, mentions Bill de Ropp, and it says he produced 70% of the political intelligence on Nazi Germany. I thought to myself, this is extraordinary. There it is. And I was very lucky, because I started researching it, and I eventually got to meet his grandson in Tennessee, and his grandson had all the family papers on the dining room table when I arrived. And it's an author's dream, really. There it all was, including photographs of him with Rosenberg, and that was the moment I thought there might be a book here.
Look, finally, are there lessons from his story that we should apply to the sort of evolving world order at the moment, particularly in terms of preparations for war, rearmament, understanding the intentions of what could be an aggressor?
There are so many resonances through this. There's a lot about the Polish guarantee in the book, and that is so reminiscent of the Ukrainian backstop. And with sort of Putin moving westward through Ukraine, Bill de Ropp would have been a very worried man. And MI6, in that famous report called What Should We Do, basically say, look, we're going to have to appease this guy until we build our armaments, until we can win. Fortunately, unlike 2025, in 1938 we were building Spitfires and Hurricanes as fast as we could produce them. And the extra year that Munich bought made a huge difference, of course. So at least we were rearming, which is slightly different, of course, to now.
Gosh, well, it's such a fascinating story, and as you say, a timely one as well. The book is The Spy and the Devil, the untold story of the MI6 agent who penetrated Hitler's inner circle. It's out now. Thanks very much indeed, Tim Willasey-Wilsey. Great pleasure to have you here.